right, so we are talking about photosynthesis today, okay? We already went through this slide. Now you can see the GIF or GIF or whatever you call it moving and saying the my. Um, but we're going to start out today with talking about light. So talking about light, there are a whole lot of different kinds of light. We can't see all of them. So the light that we can see, we call visible light or white light. And it's composed of lots of different wavelengths. And that's how you see the different colors of light based on their wavelength. And each color carries a specific amount of energy. And so that's what this little table is showing you right here. So I want you to look at this table and looking at this table, which color of light has the most energy? We're going to practice some data analysis here. Which color of light based on this table has the most energy? Good. Violet, because violet is down here with 487 times 10 to the negative 21st joules. Okay, so it would be violet. Which color has the least amount of energy? Good. Red. So red is up here at the top, and that one has 295 times 10 to the negative 21st, because that's up here, joules. Okay, so this one would be red. Good. We just like to throw in a little bit of analysis here and there. Now, why are we talking about light when we're supposed to be talking about photosynthesis? Well, solar energy is required to start photosynthesis, and we get solar energy from light. Okay, so light is our solar energy that we need to start photosynthesis. When we say visible light, this is, your colors of the rainbow. So Roy G. Biv, that's where Roy G. Biv comes in. So you can see here, if this whole thing were a spectrum of the different types of lights, and you can't see, where's my mouse here? Okay, so if this whole thing here were the spectrum of light, we really can only see a super small part of light, and that is that visible light or white light. So let's get through some vocab words here too, okay? Chlorophyll. Chlorophyll are green pigments that are found embedded in the thylakoid membrane, which we're going to talk about what a thylakoid is. And those are inside chloroplasts, okay? And chlorophyll captures the light energy. Okay, so chlorophyll are green pigments that are in chloroplasts that capture the light. Okay, now pigments are molecules that absorb the energy in certain colors of light while reflecting other colors of light. So some of you may know this, others that don't, it might blow your mind. So hold on to your chairs. The reason that plants appear green is because they absorb every single color except green. So the chlorophyll in plants are absorbing, so like picture a bright green leaf or grass. It's absorbing every single color on the visible light spectrum except green. Okay, it's actually reflecting green. How many of you knew that? I see one. Okay, so a few. Good. Um, that's going to be important to know. Okay, so plants don't use the energy from green light because they're reflecting it. They use the energy of every other color of light. Okay. So green light reflects off of the plant and into our eyes, which is why we see plants as green. I am kind of a photosynthesis nerd. I don't know why. I just am. But Wesley, it's one of my favorite units to teach. So yes, good point, Mrs. McAnally. That's why colorblind people get their wavelengths crossed. They see those wavelengths differently. So let's talk about absorbance really quick. This is really just practicing with another graph right here, okay? I want to remind you, you have little zoom buttons on your neuro screen, so you can zoom in on this graph if it's not big enough for you, okay? So looking at this graph, okay, absorbance is what's shown. So it means that the percent of energy that's captured by the pigments is what we are seeing on this chart. Okay. Um, so what colors of light have the highest amount of absorbance by the leaf? So looking at this graph, what colors get absorbed the most based on this graph right here? Okay, blue. Yep. What other colors? Okay, the blue, violet. Good. So, oops. Blue, violet. Any other colors that are high up there? Good. The red, okay, that reddy orange, more red than orange. So red also is high. So up here is the highest, and this part here is pretty high too. Good. Now remember that chlorophyll is a pigment. So chlorophyll A and B, there's two different types, but they have a low absorbance of which colors? Okay, which color has the lowest absorbance or like transition from one color to another? Good. Green, which we would expect that green would be the lowest because that's the color we see them at. And yep, you could say blue too because it's kind of right here where they transition. So this green or green blue section. Okay. Yep, yellow as well. Good. Okay, so that's why we see leaves as the colors that we do, as those deep greens. That's where your blue is more so going to come in as well with those deeper green colors. Or you see the bright green leaves, those are probably reflecting green and some yellow. Okay. What we already talked about the connection. Okay, but what connection do you see between this picture here and the graph? Think about the color of the leaf. So what connections do you see between the graph and the leaf? We already kind of talked about it. Good. It doesn't absorb any green, but it absorbs a lot of blue, red, and violet. Good. So it's absorbing colors that you don't see, and it's reflecting the green that we do see. Um, good. So, um, oops, I didn't mean to make that smaller. It's reflecting that green, yellow, and absorbing the other ones. So good. Now, question, and I kind of gave you a little bit of this answer earlier, so let's see who caught it. So we said that this leaf reflects green. Is it using the energy from the green light? If I'm reflecting green energy, am I using that energy? No, I'm not. Good. So it's not using that energy, okay? If I'm reflecting that energy, it's gone before I can even think about grabbing it. Is the plant using the energy of the light that it's absorbing? So in this picture, is it using the blue and red light energy? Good. Yes. So if I am absorbing that light, that's the energy that I can use. So for plants, when they're absorbing all of the other colors except green, it's the other colors that are giving the energy for the plant to start photosynthesis. Everybody with me so far? Okay, good. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's talk about photosynthesis. Okay. Photosynthesis is the process that transforms solar energy, which remember we said was, I'm going to get a different color here and go a little bit larger. Let's do blue. So solar energy is our light energy. Okay, that's where light comes in, into chemical energy. Now, chemical energy is going to be stored as something that we have talked about quite a bit in the last couple of units. It's going to store this as glucose. Okay, it's going to store it as a sugar. So, remember back 2 units ago when we were talking about biomolecules, um, and we started talking about the parts of a chemical equation. We talked about reactants and products. Well, quick reminder, reactants are what go into the equation. Okay, so these, I keep zooming in on that. So these are your inputs. Okay, and then products are what come out of the reaction. Okay, they're what get produced. So these are your outputs. Okay. Now in photosynthesis, we have 3 inputs and 2 outputs. Um, yes, the arrow could be labeled as reaction. Okay, that's just showing that the reaction is taking place. So yes, that one could be good. Yep. And so when we get down here, like when you see, let's break this guy down here. So when you see 6 CO2, okay, this 6 tells me that I have 6 molecules of CO2. Okay, so that would be like saying I have CO2, 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 and CO2. Okay, so there are 6 of these. That is this big number out front. This little 2 down here next to the O tells me that each of these has 2 oxygens. So it's like a carbon and 2 different oxygens. Okay, so that's what the 2 means. This part is just clarifying. Okay, these numbers can look really scary when there's so many of them, but the big number out front is how many carbon dioxide molecules we have. And then the little numbers are how many of that element are in the molecule. So there's nothing next to C, so that would be 1 carbon. There's a 2 next to the O, so that means 2 oxygen. Okay. So let's talk about this. I'm going to get another color here. Okay. So I already said it, but what is CO2? When I say 6 CO2, what is that? Carbon is in it, but does anybody know what this molecule is called? Good, Chase. It is carbon dioxide. And this is in gas form for this. Okay, so we have carbon dioxide gas. And what is H2O? Um, Carbon dioxide is not the one that is toxic to us. Carbon monoxide is. So if it was just CO, that's why you have that's what gets emitted from your car.
Well, CO2 is also, but you make that from your body. If you hold your breath, that's going to build up, and that's not good.
Yes.
So, but it's not the same that comes out your tailpipe.
Okay, good. H2O is water. Okay, so then we have, oops, why are we not working here? So then we have water. Okay, and then light is usually of sunlight. You can't. Okay, those are our three inputs. We have to have those three things for photosynthesis to take place. So carbon dioxide, water, and light. Who can remember what C6H12O6 is? We talked about it a lot over the last couple of units. We said you were going to need to know what that stood for. It's a VIP. Good. Glucose. So glucose is our main product from photosynthesis. There is one product from photosynthesis. What is O2? Who can? Good, Gage. O2 is oxygen, also in the form of gas. Okay? So, carbon dioxide, water, and light are our three inputs. Okay, we have to have those three for photosynthesis to take place. Photosynthesis produces glucose and oxygen. Okay, so it takes 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules plus the energy from sunlight to make one glucose molecule. And it also makes 6 oxygen molecules. So it takes a lot of carbon dioxide and water to make one glucose. Okay? With me on this so far. This reaction is important for you to know. Yes, they are only a PDF right now. I will be posting this PowerPoint later. I didn't realize I had posted it as a PDF. So it will be posted as a PowerPoint today. Yes, and the energy that's transferred from the reason we need sunlight, okay, and the energy from light is because that energy helps make the bonds necessary to build a glucose molecule. Okay, so let's talk about why these different things are needed for photosynthesis to happen. Okay, why do we need water? Well, the light is going to split the water which will release hydrogen and electrons, which we say are E negatives. So if you see a little E with a negative sign, that is an electron. Okay. So looking down here at this one, the light splits water into hydrogen, electrons, and then oxygen gas. Okay, so here is our first product. So that light energy splits up the water, and we have hydrogen, electrons, and then oxygen gas. The plant releases this oxygen gas back into the atmosphere as a waste product, okay? So this is where it gets really cool. That's why trees and plants are so important, because when we breathe in and breathe out, we are breathing out carbon dioxide, okay? So our waste is carbon dioxide, and plants use carbon dioxide to make their own energy through photosynthesis, and then they give off oxygen, which we then breathe in. So it's a never-ending cycle, and that's one of the reasons why I love to talk about this and teach you guys, is because that's why plants are so important. Okay? One man's trash is another man's treasure, if you've ever heard that. That's the same thing with us and plants. We give off carbon dioxide as a waste product because we don't need it, and plants use that, and they give off oxygen because they don't need oxygen, and we use that. Carbon dioxide is needed because the carbon atoms, remember how we talked about carbon is the backbone of all of your biomolecules? We need the carbon from the carbon dioxide to make our glucose molecule, okay? So the carbon, oops, I guess I can zoom in on this too. The carbon for the glucose has to come from the carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide is going to get broken down, and we're going to use that carbon to make a glucose molecule. Okay? Now, if you look at this reaction over here, or this picture over here on the right, this is looking at a chloroplast. So that's what our next slide is we're going to talk about some of the key points of chloroplast. Okay, so remember, chloroplast is only in plant cells, and they are a membrane-bound organelle, meaning that they have a membrane. Chloroplasts actually have two membranes. They have an outer membrane. Thank you, Raven. They have an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and then there's some space in between there, okay? This guy we don't really talk about, so that's not super duper important. The two most important parts, okay, I guess really three. You have the pancakes, you have the stack of pancakes, and then you have the syrup, okay? So in a chloroplast, there are all of these green discs, okay? All of these little green circles right here. These are, I know I just outlined it in pink, but one single pancake is a thylakoid, okay? So that is a single pancake, okay? This granum is a stack of pancakes. So one of these stacks right here, okay, is the granum. So that is a stack of pancakes. And then the stroma is kind of like the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, okay? It's that like jelly liquidy inside that takes up the rest of the space. So I call that the syrup. I love food references. It makes it easier for me to remember. So I like to give a lot of food references. So this, I don't know why I keep doing that, is the syrup, okay, that fills the rest of the space. So single pancake is the thylakoid. Stack of pancakes are the granum. And then all the space around it, the liquid all around it, is the stroma. Okay? So there are two parts to the process of photosynthesis, and they take place in two different parts of the chloroplast, which is why we're learning about them. So we're going to be talking about the thylakoid and granum for the first part, and then the stroma for the second part. Okay? I just wanted to make sure you know the difference between those three things. So, as I said, photosynthesis has two sub-processes, okay? Think of it like a part A and a part B. The light-dependent reaction, or the LDR, takes place first, okay? And that takes place over here. I love that I'm not writing. That takes place over here in the stack. Okay, so it takes place in the thylakoids and the granum. The second part is the light independent reaction, or the LIR, which is also called the Kelvin cycle. Okay, all three of those things are the same thing: light independent reaction, LIR, Kelvin cycle. They're all interchangeable. Okay, and those happen over here in the stroma. What does it mean when I say a light dependent reaction? What do you think that means? A light dependent reaction. Okay. What does it mean that it depends on light, though? Good. It means that we have to have light. Okay. So light is needed. So must have light. So do you think that the light dependent reaction process could take place at nighttime when it's dark outside? No, exactly. So light dependent reaction has to have light. Okay. What do we think light independent reaction means? What do we think the light independent reaction means? Good. No light is needed. So I keep hitting the, okay. So no light needed. Have you ever planted flowers, okay, or different types of plants, and they say that some of them, need full sunlight, or some are good in the shade, or some, it doesn't matter where they're planted. Okay, Gage, you planted sunflowers before. Sunflowers are a full light flower, okay? Um, Good, yeah. So that's because they need more light than other like more time with light than other plants based on their structures. Okay, so it's all related to photosynthesis. If something has thicker, wider, kind of waxier leaves, it can be without a lot of sunlight. Okay, they only need a little bit of sunlight. If something is really delicate, like a small flower, or like the big sunflowers take up so much that they only have a stem and their leaves often get covered, those need to have full sunlight so they can get the maximum amount of light energy to produce these photosynthesis reactions to be able to make their own food. Okay, everyone with me so far? You guys are doing really good. We're about to break down the LDR and the LIR and learn the difference between the two. Like I said, there are two parts to photosynthesis, and the first part is the light dependent reaction, which reminder means that we must have light. And this is a photo process, which just means that it absorbs photons of light, which are what give it energy. Okay. And these reactions absorb solar energy, okay, from sunlight, and they store it as chemical energy. Okay, so we're going to absorb that solar energy and we're going to store it as chemical energy. And what that chemical energy is going to look like is it's going to be what we call ATP and NADPH. Now, ATP, we've seen a bunch of times this semester, okay? Love ATP, super important. And excuse me. Um, ATP super important. Okay, reminder that those are the energy currency. So that's like your cash money of getting things done. Okay. And then NADPH is a new term. It sounds scary. I promise it's not that bad. In the next slide or two, we're going to be talking about trains and batteries to make your lives easier. Not quite, Gage. So we will talk about it. The only term you need to know to call this is NADPH. So this all happens, okay? Right over here, right over here in the thylakoids and the granum, okay? So what are the two reactants that you see entering, okay, or inputting into the light dependent reaction? Remember, you have a little plus sign that you can zoom in on. I can zoom in here too, maybe. What are my two inputs? Okay, look at the arrows. What two things are going into this reaction on the left side of this picture? Reminder that we are looking at this side over here. This stuff we're not worrying about right now. That's okay, Gage. So we're looking at the light dependent reaction. What two things are coming into this reaction? Good. Light is coming in. Okay, that has an arrow pointing inward. I'm going to get a different color here for that one. Okay. So light is coming in. That's an input. What else is coming into this reaction? Good. Light. Oh, we already did light. Sorry. Yes, good. Water. So water is the other one that is coming into this reaction. What water was going in, what is getting produced? It'll be towards the bottom of the picture. Good. Oxygen. Okay, so oxygen is coming out. Okay, so that is my product. Now, I want to point out something else. There are two other things that are produced from this reaction. Okay, they have a bigger blue arrow pointing over towards the light dependent or light independent reaction side. What are they? I don't want the arrow coming in, I want the arrow going out. So it's going to be pointing towards the other side. Okay, good. ATP. And what else is with ATP? Good. NADPH. Okay. So, there we go. So, it's producing, okay, it's taking that light energy and it's producing ATP and NADPH. And then it's breaking down that water molecule and getting rid of the oxygen. Okay, so oxygen is released as a waste product, and then ATP and NADPH are passed on to the next cycle. Okay, so let's talk about what is NADPH. You know how I said how we were going to talk about trains and batteries? NADPH is your shuttle or your train. Okay. And what NADPH does is it is a high energy electron carrier. Okay. So it carries electrons. That's its job. So when we break down that water molecule, okay, they bind to NADP plus, okay, which fills up the train and it makes it NADPH. So NADPH is your full train. Okay, notice how it's carrying electrons. It's basically shuttling those electrons over to the light independent reaction, and then it's going to drop them off. And once it gets rid of those two electrons and leaves them over on the other side, then the empty train, okay, notice how there's nothing in here. That empty train is NADP plus. So that is your empty train. Okay. So I know NADPH, NADP plus, they sound really scary. There's a lot of letters, but it's just a train. So it's going to pick up electrons from the light dependent reaction. It's going to shuttle them over and drop them off in the light independent reaction. And then it's going to come back for more. Okay. So NADPH is an NADP plus. It's just a never-ending circle of a train that's picking up from one side and dropping off at the other side. Okay? Are you following me with that? What questions do we have on NADPH? Can everyone still hear me okay? Okay. Just making sure. We were pretty quiet in the chat there. So that was our train. Now let's talk about our battery. Okay? Our battery is our ATP. Remember, ATP is our energy currency. So it's an energy carrying molecule, okay? Remember when we talked about how when ATP gets used, it kicks off that third phosphate group and turns into ADP? Well, ADP can get recycled and turned back into ATP once it gets that extra phosphate group back. So this is your battery. It's a rechargeable battery. Okay? It is a fancy battery, okay? It's one of those fancy rechargeable batteries, okay? And its plug-in station where it gets full again, where it recharges, is the light-dependent reaction, okay? So ATP is your full battery, and ADP is your empty battery, okay? So the light-dependent reaction, that light, the energy from the light charges that battery, okay? And then it moves over into the Kelvin cycle or the light independent reaction where it's used to make the glucose. So we use the ATP to build those bonds and make that glucose, okay? Then, because it was used, because it's a lot of work to make the glucose, you now have an empty battery that is ADP that travels back into the thylakoid to get recharged from sunlight to then go back and build more glucose. So ATP is your battery that's getting charged, getting used, and then going back to get recharged, okay? And NADPH is your train that's just shuttling hydrogens and electrons from one place to the next. Are you following about these two molecules? They're really important, but you can break them down so they're a little bit easier to understand. Okay, good. We're almost done, guys. You're doing so good. So that's the end of the light dependent reaction. Okay, now let's talk about the light independent reaction. Okay, the second part. This one is also called the Kelvin cycle. I'm going to be really honest. I call it the Kelvin cycle more times than not. So if you hear me say Kelvin cycle, I'm talking about this. Okay, the independent, light independent reactions. It's the same thing. Okay, this is the synthesis process or glue process. Okay, this creates the sugar. Now we're taking all of these parts and we're going through a semi-complicated Kelvin cycle to bind glucose together and send it on to be used somewhere else in the cell. Okay, so this process uses the energy from the ATP along with the hydrogen and electrons from the NADPH, and then the carbon from carbon dioxide. And all of that together is going to create the bonds that we see in this glucose molecule. So that's going to glue it all together, hold it all together, and build this ring sugar of glucose. Okay. Why do we care about photosynthesis, Mrs. Stauffer? Because it produces the raw materials that produce almost everything else that a plant cell needs. It produces amino acids, it works in lipids, it's a part of cellulose, which is makes up the cell wall of plants. And we already talked about how plants are super important. And some of us eat plants as food. I mean, I hope all of you eat some type of plant, but really important. Okay. So let's talk about what goes into this, okay? There are 3 things that go into this process, okay, into the LIR. Our big reactant is carbon dioxide, okay? So carbon dioxide comes into the plant. And why I say that's a big reactant, because although we do use these as reactants in this Kelvin cycle, they're already in the cell. So when you think about the overall big photosynthesis equation that we looked at the beginning, where was it? This guy, okay? You know, we only have 3 inputs. That's because there's only 3 things that have to go into the plant for the reaction to take place. So the plant has to take in carbon dioxide, the plant has to take in water, and the plant has to take in light. These ATP and NADPH, they're already kind of in the cell as ADP and NADP plus. Okay, so although we have 3 main reactants for the whole process, these count as a reactant for the Kelvin cycle. Does that make sense? Okay. What is my product? Okay, my big product from the light independent reaction. Good. Glucose. Okay, this sugar. Glucose is my big product here. Okay. What other 2 things are produced from this cycle or left over from this cycle that we're going to recycle? Okay, what does my top arrow show? Glucose is leaving the chloroplast. Okay, good. ADP is one of them. And NADP plus. Good. And you may be asking, why is it NADP plus? So remember that NADPH carries hydrogen and electrons. Well, the hydrogen is the H, so that's why that's gone, why it's just NADP. And then electrons have a negative charge, right? So if I take off a negative charge, I'm going to be left with something that's positively charged. So that's where that plus comes in. Okay. Any questions on the light independent reaction? Okay. So we're going to fill out this handy dandy table, which is going to help you have an overview of the process as a whole. Okay. So I'm going to use 2 different colors here. The light dependent reaction. What are my inputs for the light dependent reaction? Thank you, Mrs. McAnally. What are my inputs for the light dependent reaction? What are my reactants? If you need to flip back in the PDF that you should have open to follow along, it's going to be in the picture that's down here in the corner. Okay? What's my light dependent inputs, okay, or ingredients? I'm not going to give you guys the answers. You're going to have to help fill this chart out. Good, Elijah. Light and water are super duper important. Okay, so I need light and water for these to happen. So I need light and water. Okay, so 6 waters. Now, if I'm just looking at the light dependent reaction, what other 2 things do I need? These would have been on a blue arrow. What other 2 things do I need? Good, Serenity. I do need ADP. Good, an NADP plus. Okay, so these guys right here are my big reactants. Okay, but for this light dependent reaction, I also need ADP and NADP plus. What are my outputs? What am I producing from the light dependent reaction? What are my products? Good, oxygen. Yep. Oops, why do I keep doing that? Okay, so oxygen. That's my big one. Okay. But what else am I producing that are going to move on to the next process? Good. I'm also producing ATP and NADPH. Now, where does the light dependent reaction take place? And don't just say the chloroplast. I need a specific part of the chloroplast. Where does this take place? Okay, yes, in our stack of potatoes, okay? Or stack of pancakes. I don't know where I got potatoes. So this happens in the grana, or you could also say the thylakoid. Okay? But this takes place in those pancakes. Okay? So I'll even write that up here for you. Stack of pancakes. Now, let's talk about the light independent reaction. So let's talk about the Kelvin cycle. What goes into the Kelvin cycle? What are my ingredients for the Kelvin cycle? Very good, Elijah. So I need 6 CO2. So carbon dioxide is my big one, okay? So that's, oops, what in the world was that? Sorry, I'm writing on my iPad and it doesn't always want to work for me. Okay. So that's my big reactant. And my other 2 reactants that I use, maybe, are ATP and NADP. Oops. NADPH. Okay, those all go into my reaction. What gets produced? by the Kelvin cycle. What's my big product? The whole purpose of photosynthesis. It's my big product. Glucose. Good. Okay, that is my big product. But what else gets produced? If I use up my ATP and my NADPH, what am I left with? Good, Serenity. I'm left with ADP and NADP plus. Now, where does the Kelvin cycle happen? What specific part of the chloroplast does the Kelvin cycle happen in? Good, the stroma. That's your syrup. Okay? Now, there's one more thing that I want to point out on this. Okay? And I'm going to do this in a third color. Let's look at photosynthesis as a whole. What are my 3 big picture inputs for photosynthesis? Here's a hint. They're boxed in. Light is absolutely one of them. Good. 6 CO2. Good. Water. And then when my reaction takes place, what are my 2 outputs? What are my 2 big picture outputs of photosynthesis? Glucose is absolutely one of them. And oxygen. Good. And now photosynthesis as a whole, what organelle does photosynthesis take place in? Which organelle do I have to go through photosynthesis? Good. The chloroplast. So do you guys see why in the big photosynthesis equation, I don't add ATP, ADP, NADPH, and NADP plus? Because those never leave, okay? They don't have to come into the chloroplast or into the plant. They don't have to leave the plant. They're just already in those cells, okay? They're already in the chloroplast, ready to go, and they stay there, okay? Now, I want everybody to screen snip this because this is really important. How do you feel? Maybe if I can click it, how do you feel about today's lesson? 1 being I don't understand anything. 5 being I am so super confident on this. And then 2 through 4, a sliding scale of yes and no's. If you are finding yourself at a 1 or 2, please ask us questions.